Well, I didn't expect that. Let's talk about the REI and Cottage brands video. Let's go. I am always surprised when a video does better than I anticipated, when a video that I pulled together pretty quickly. I did a fair amount of research for this one, but my top 3 videos now have nothing to do with kayaking, which kind of cracks me up. The first 2, or the other 2 in the top 3, they were 1 and 2, they are now 2 and 3. I really pulled together really quickly, and it was just me sort of talking off the cuff about something that I'm passionate about, or something that I think, is interesting. And both of those surprised me, but nothing prepared me for what has happened in the past week. As I record this, it's 9 days since the Future of Outdoor Gear video went live, and it's right around 40,000 views, right around 850 thumbs up, right around 400 comments, which dwarfs just about anything else that I've released. So it is my most popular video. It was my fastest video to 10,000 views. It was shocking, to say the least, and boy, have there been a lot of comments, and that's what I want to discuss, some really great comments. For starters, 600 new subscribers in 9 days. Welcome. It is so nice to see you all here. I hope you stick around. I hope that you find this channel interesting. Here are the rules. The rules are, I welcome people who disagree with me. I want to have conversations. I work really hard to respond to all the comments. There were some delays on this one because I was working. I was teaching wilderness first aid course, and comments were coming in fast and furious. And so occasionally I would find a thread that I had not been aware of. But the rules are this. The comment section is polite. The comment section is courteous. There is not a team of filmmakers and writers here. You're responding or commenting to me, and I'm a human being. So courteous and respectful is encouraged. Rudeness will not be tolerated. But hey, thanks for coming, and I really appreciate it. Okay, let's talk about REI. My goal was not to dump on REI. I love REI. I worked for REI for 15 years. I've been a member of REI for over 20 years. I think they're in a bad place right now, but I think people like dumping on REI. If you left a comment that REI's problems were, and I'm going to read this from a list because it's a good list. If REI's problems are because of their politics, their wokeness, China, gun control, executive cash grabs, or the fact that I was wearing and am wearing Patagonia while at the same time picking on the North Face, your comment was deleted and you're blocked from the channel. There were some really great comments, and I want to comment on those comments or respond to those comments, but I'm not going to listen to nonsense. There's real stuff to talk about here, and let's talk about real stuff instead of ridiculousness. A couple of times I was close to shutting down the comments on this video. I didn't because there were so many insightful comments. You tend to get sucked into the negative ones, but there were some really, really insightful comments, and even just got one that I just took the time to respond to. Super insightful, great point of view that differs slightly than mine. And as I said, I'm fine with that. And I responded thoughtfully and politely. I respect the person who is a regular commenter here. I respect the person who disagrees with me. You're allowed to disagree with me, but you're not allowed to be rude. Okay, so for the record, REI is not going out of business. I didn't mean to imply that they were going out of business. REI's financial records are open to the public. They are online. And so you can see what is going on with REI. REI is making a lot of revenue, but REI's operating expenses are pretty high and are going up. And that's really the problem that they're facing. And a lot of companies are facing those same problems. But as I said, a lot of people, and I think a lot of people like dumping on REI when things aren't going well. And so there was a fair amount of that. And I want to talk about some of those things. And I apologize, I have to look at notes because I want to get them right. Because people did for the most part, people did really great comments, and I just want to make sure that I'm getting them right. If you complained about REI's prices being too high, a lot of people did. I did some price comparisons. This is something that I heard when I worked for REI, and so I have done this in the past, and I did this today, and I just did some quick Google shopping to sort of see what was going on. And I looked at tents, I looked at backpacks, I looked at stoves, I looked at trekking poles. I'm not sure what else I looked at, a bunch of stuff. And REI's prices were in line with most of the other big stores. Amazon is always less because that's what Amazon does. And I found of the few independent shops that have websites that have prices were usually a little bit higher than REI's prices. And part of the reason for this is that a lot of manufacturers dictate what prices can be. And that's not really up to REI. Companies can raise their prices, but for the most part, companies want to lower their prices as much as they can so that they stand apart and will get your business, right? That's why Amazon's prices are so low, but Amazon can afford to do that. With that in mind, that I don't think that's a fair criticism of REI. There are plenty of things you can complain about with REI, but that's not one of them. REI's prices may seem expensive, but if you shop around other than Amazon, prices are pretty consistent. A lot of people complained about REI's product offerings, and that, for the most part, is capitalism. If people aren't buying stuff, they're gonna sell the stuff that people are buying. I had someone this morning complain about the water bottle selection, and I'm like, well, if no one's buying the bottles, they're going to switch to bottles that people are buying. You know, with maybe the exception of Nalgene, which seems to be a perennial, that is a category within REI where there is a fair amount of changeover. Right now we're seeing Stanley everywhere as opposed to other brands. What I do think is sort of the biggest problem right now with REI is that they've lost some of the control of the market because they aren't able or willing to get the newest, most cutting-edge gear available for their customers. And I think there's a lot of factors for that. I think a big part of it, though, is supply chain. But honestly, the bulk of REI's customers are not looking for a $600 sleep system. They're looking for a sleeping bag to go backpacking with. The vast majority of REI's customers are relatively new to the outdoors and need the basic gear, and then they will continue to shop around. But I think because we're in an era where it is so easy to find cutting-edge gear online, I think that's actually what's hurting them. Okay, on to real things, because if you thought last week's video was about REI, you were wrong. It was about what I see as the future of outdoor gear, which I think is cottage brands. So let's talk about that for a minute. A lot of people commented on how expensive cottage gear is. And while there is some cottage gear that is very expensive, it isn't true across the board. A lot of AT thru hikers are using cottage brand gear. If your goal is to have the lightest weight backpacking gear, you're going to be doing some cottage brand stuff, both packs and tents or tarp tents, whatever, something like that, and quilts. I feel like those brands or those product types are what drove cottage to the forefront. And I think it was AT thru hikers who pushed cottage to a bit more mainstream. And then that got us to things like garage grown gear and things like that. It can be more expensive for some of that stuff, but I want to talk about the three brands that I highlighted. Turning Point Boatworks boats are expensive, but they're no more expensive than a carbon fiber P&H or a Nigel Dennis kayaks. But most importantly, Turning Point is not using boat designs from 20 years ago. They're updating boat designs, they're updating materials, they're updating process, manufacturing techniques. And that is great, and they're doing it for about the cost of a high-end, P&H or NDK. Deliberate Life sandals are no more expensive than Chacos. Zen Bivy dry bags, which I tested, I'll put a link to that up here, are the same price as a Sea to Summit dry bag. In fact, I checked, and a Zen Bivy 15-liter dry bag is the exact same cost as a Sea to Summit lightweight dry bag, which is what I used to use, but in the Sea to Summit 13-liter size. And the Zen Bivy bag has welded seams versus taped seams, and an air purge valve, which the Sea to Summit doesn't have. Exact same price. It's not more expensive. Lendal is priced comparably to Werner paddles. Werner, which is, of course, available at REI. So the products that I talked about were not more expensive than competing products. And as I said, you can absolutely find cottage brands that are ridiculously expensive, but the three that I highlighted were not. Okay, I mentioned Werner. So I got a couple comments. How come I didn't mention Werner in this video? How come I didn't mention Delta in this video? How come I didn't mention Seaward kayaks in this video? How come I didn't mention Eddyline in this video? There were a lot of brands I could have mentioned. I chose not to mention Werner. I love the Werner paddles that I've got. I think they're great, but they're not cottage. They're not a cottage brand. They are privately owned, but they produce a lot of paddles. And in fact, in the previous video, I said this. Arguably the two biggest, this is arguable, it depends on whose numbers you believe, the two biggest manufacturers of paddles is Aquabound and Bending Branches. And the reason I said that was because there was data that I found but couldn't confirm with another source that Werner actually sells more paddles than anyone. I found a couple of sources that gave me the Aquabound Bending Branches numbers, but I could not find another source for how many paddles Werner sells. Werner makes great paddles, but again, on the innovation thing, I feel like their designs are pretty set. We don't see great changes. I think the last changes we saw in Werner, for touring kayakers, there's the Ovation, which is a very lightweight, even they say fragile paddle. I haven't had a chance to paddle it, but I'd like to. Very expensive. And then they released some paddles that were fishing specific. I'm not a fisherman. I haven't used them. But it's been a while since I feel like we've seen anything new or really making us go, wow, out of Werner. Whereas my comparison to Lendal is saying, hey, why do we need drip rings? We can fix that problem. So it's that sort of mindset, is how can we fix problems and make this product better? I didn't mention Delta because I feel like Delta is very similar. Delta sells a lot of boats, as does Eddyline, but I'm not as familiar with that company. So let me tackle Delta first. Delta is privately owned, but again, if you watch my review of my Delta 17, they're making boats for the mass market now. And the cottage brands, which I don't really like that term, there needs to be a better term. If you know a better term, leave it in the comments. The cottage brands are not building for the mass market. And so I feel like that's what Delta is doing. When I got my very first Delta, it was Delta 17 available as a sport or expedition model, which was really low volume, high volume. And I thought that was great because it gave us options. And we've lost a lot of options like that from Delta. And that troubles me about Delta. I still love my boat. Delta makes great boats. I'm not knocking Delta. They make great boats, but they're not a cottage brand. Eddyline is making great boats. I've paddled them a couple times, but I don't know a whole lot about sort of their manufacturing process and their design process, so I can't speak to Eddyline. Seaward, I would really like to test paddle a Seaward Guide 17. I got to paddle Seawards the last time I was in Alaska with Knowles. We had an array of Seaward boats. Knowles has the largest Seaward fleet in the world, and I got to paddle them, and they are beautiful boats. But again, I can't speak to how cottage they are. They do have a lot of different boat models, but I don't really know the brand, like the inner workings of that brand that well. They might be cottage. I don't really know. A lot of commenters said, well, we see this every 20 years. We see little companies that are innovative, and then in 10 or 15 years, they get bought up by other companies. You're right, we do see that, but I don't think that's what's happening this time. Because of the ease of direct-to-consumer and communication is unlike anything in the history of retail. And so I feel like these companies are now making enough money that they don't need to get bought out. I think that might be their retirement plan, but I suspect we are not going to see the absorption of these little companies into big companies. Maybe I'm wrong. Time will tell, but I don't think we're going to see it because I think these companies, unlike 20 years ago where they couldn't really distribute worldwide easily, communicate with people worldwide easily, now they can. And the proof of that is I sell books online and gear lists and stuff like that, and in 3 days I had 15,000 views. That was not possible 20 years ago. Okay, a lot of people felt that it was hypocritical of me to call out the North Face while wearing Patagonia. There is a video coming that talks about those two companies. and they're really very different companies. Something that I did not put in the video that is coming out is Patagonia just released sailing fowlies for the first time, a market they've never been in, and it looks like they did a really nice job with it. And that's what I'm talking about in terms of innovation, is where can we go, what can we do, where our products can, with tweaking, with changes, can slide into a market to serve people doing amazing stuff in the outdoors. Those two companies, the North Face and Patagonia, I think are very different companies. I'll talk about that a little bit in another video, but I did not mention that sailing thing, so I wanted to throw that in here. But if you used, in your comment, if you used the term Patagucci, you're not going to understand those differences and probably don't care. You just wanted to make fun of Patagonia for being expensive, which they are, but not really any more expensive than the North Face or Marmot. They're certainly not more expensive than Arc'teryx, and no one is making fun of Arc'teryx. Okay, finally, the last thing I want to say is it seemed like a lot of people had a lot of reasons to be mad at REI, and that's not that surprising for a multi-billion-dollar company. One thing that I am grateful for is that the 800-pound gorilla in the outdoor retail space is a co-op and not a company like Amazon. Now I'm going to get emails angry that I picked on Amazon twice. Yes, REI's primary goal is to make money. They give a lot of money back to members. They've done better in the past few years about paying people fairly, but it feels like it's too little too late. And they're struggling now with union stuff, but they also donate a lot of money to nonprofit environmental groups. And I feel like those are still better things than what we could have. If you want to get mad at billion-dollar companies, there are lots of companies out there that are way worse than REI. So I would encourage you to channel your anger towards them. Okay, thanks for watching. I want to thank everyone who watched that video, who liked that video, who commented on that video. This has been an absolute blast for me. I'm really curious to see where it goes. Yeah, I guess I'll see you outside wearing my Patagucci.